You're listening to the Around the Huddle podcast, powered by PAC-Hub. Around the Huddle, college sports beyond the game.
Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Around the Huddle podcast, where we talk about college sports beyond the game. My name is John Gross. So happy to have all of you with us today. Look, we are in a very busy part of the college sports calendar. March Madness is here. Winter sports are winding down. Spring sports are now in full swing. Just a quick disclaimer. If my voice gives out at all today, I do apologize. I just finished calling 22 games in 11 days. So I've been speaking a lot lately. Finally have a couple of days off now. But hey, it's that time of the year, so it's been a lot of fun. Hey, speaking of fun, we will have a really good episode today talking about a subject I feel like is very under-discussed in the NIL discussion. So we will dive into that today. But before we get to our fantastic guest, a reminder that we are powered by PAC-Hub. Take a look, bottom of your screen, pac-hub.com. If you are a student athlete and you enter the NCAA transfer portal, how do you get noticed? That's where PAC-Hub comes into play. In PAC-Hub, if you enter the PAC-Hub portal, your stats will populate, academic information will populate, all of these different specifications that allow coaches to go out and find you. That's in PAC-Hub. And then from the coach's perspective, if you want to find that missing piece, you want to find that one player that is going to take your team from conference tournament to NCAA tournament, from NCAA tournament to a championship, that's PAC-Hub. You can search by a whole host of different specifications. Find your missing piece on PAC-Hub. Again, pac-hub.com. PAC-Hub connecting athletes with opportunities in this ever-changing college sports landscape. PAC-Hub truly is on the front lines of some of these revolutionary alterations in the industry. Okay, our guest today is somebody who is going to discuss a topic that we have briefly touched on this show, but not as in depth as we will be going today. Our topic today is how international student athletes who are playing their college athletics in the United States are impacted by NIL and how they factor into this whole discussion. And to discuss all of this, our guest is Ashley Q. Rotchford. Ashley is an associate at Robinson Cole LLP. She assists employers on a range of immigration law matters, including regulatory compliance and obtaining visas for key talent. Ashley's clients include professional sports teams within numerous top-tier professional leagues, Fortune 100 companies, and businesses of all sizes. Ashley has experience with non-immigrant and immigrant petitions, family-based petitions, waivers of inadmissibility, and the PERM labor certification process. Ashley is also very well versed in handling matters with federal agencies, including the Department of Labor, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, as well as U.S. embassies and consulates. She assists clients with I-9 compliance, performing internal audits and employer trainings. In addition, Ashley counsels colleges and universities regarding compliance with NCAA regulations, including name, image, and likeness, aka NIL rules. So without further ado, let's welcome in our guest to today's episode of the Around the Huddle podcast, Ashley Rotchford. Ashley, thanks for hopping on today.
Happy to be here.
So as we just explained, you have a very extensive bio, a lot of really interesting things that you do in your role. Let's obviously focus on the back part of that, the NIL side of things. So if you can give us some sort of hypothetical example that explains what you do and kind of what you deal with in the NIL space, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so we've dealt with it, frankly, a lot from the college side, right, from universities, as well as university-linked organizations, right? So for instance, right, like Villanova, right, creates an organization to help guide their students through NIL, and working with them, especially when it comes to their foreign students, to see what can they do without implicating their status, right? And that is really where we kind of tailor our services. We've also counseled individuals on the same kinds of things, additionally with different visa options, right? Outside of the F1, your student visa, that actually do permit work and would give them permission to do more of a range of NIL activities, right, than they can do as an F1.
Okay, very interesting. And you mentioned F1 visas. I think there are going to be some terms in this discussion that some people
Yes.
may not be familiar with in the whole immigration discussion. What are some of those key terms that you think our viewers and listeners should know about?
Yeah, so your F1 is going to be your student athlete, well, your student visa, really, but here we're talking about F1 student athlete. So these are foreign nationals that come to the United States generally for college, but also postgraduate school. So in the NCAA, there are about 25,000 student athletes. About 13% of Division I athletes are going to be F1 students or non-nationals, right? So you also can have the dependence of different types of non-citizens here that might not be here on F1s, but might have the same restrictions of employment. Other terms, oh Lord, there's so many acronyms in immigration. I feel like it could be a problem. But you have your embassies and consulates. DOS is Department of State. When we talk about visas, we're talking about the physical stamp in a person's passport that lets them enter the United States versus, say, like an I-20, which is issued by the Department of State, but is what indicates a person is in a school, right? In a CVIS authorized school. And CVIS is like an online, right, organization. It's through the government that schools have to be accepted into in order to sponsor F1 students.
Interesting. One of the reasons why I want to have this discussion is because I don't think people are talking about it enough. I work in the sports industry. I follow college sports all the time, and I saw some discussion on the impact that foreign student athletes may have on the NIL world and kind of what they're allowed to have and what they can't be involved in. But I feel like people aren't talking about it enough. People also probably don't really realize what it takes for a foreign student athlete to get recruited, come to the US, get those visas, be allowed to go to the school. So let's start there. What is the typical process like for a college team to bring a student athlete who is from outside of the United States to their college to play for them?
Yeah, so outside of the NCAA rules, right, where you have to talk about like if they're a sophomore, right, do they have enough credits towards graduation? And outside of that type of eligibility, the school has to work with the Department of State. The student has to apply to the school, get accepted, and then the school needs to issue what's called an I-20. And kind of essential to this aspect is when you're here on an F1, you have to show you can pay your tuition or that somebody can pay your tuition, right? You are not able to get federal grants, right? Anything, any kind of like of those scholarships through the government, right? You're very limited in the type of financial aid that you can receive. So once the I-20 is issued, you still have to go to a US embassy or consulate abroad, right? Be it in Canada, Mexico, right? There's like over 200 embassies and consulates across the globe. Generally, you'll go in your home country and you have to go in front of an officer and explain why you qualify for an F1 visa. A big part of the F1 visa is that it's what's called non-immigrant intent, meaning you intend to depart the United States at the end of your stay, right? Meaning you're not entering to get a green card, which theoretically you may be in the future, but you need to show that you're going to depart at the end, right? At least at this first time. And for a lot of students, that's easy, but for certain nationalities, that's incredibly challenging, especially for stateless individuals, people from, say, the Ukraine or Russia, where there's no home embassy and consulates, and they might have been living in different countries for periods of time. You're talking about, Latin and South America have a high level of scrutiny as well. So that can present issues when you're presented it. And the final step, quite frankly, and sometimes the hardest step is entering the US. You have to go to Customs and Border Protection, present yourself, and still be admitted to the United States before you can even start being enrolled really in that school and start playing for that maybe Division I, Division II, Division III program.
So are there instances of student athletes having been recruited, they go through this process and they get denied and they can't come to school? Or is it like a given that when they have this opportunity, they're going to get through the system?
So consular officers have a lot of discretion to deny people visas, right? Some are national security reasons, right? They can argue that they weren't able to do a full background check on the individual, so they can't say if that person's a risk to the United States, right? It does happen. Is it super common with your D1 athletes? Probably not. But let's say they had an arrest for drug possession. Okay, let's say marijuana too, of all things, right? Like what the US considers to be still a Schedule I substance, but state by state might be legal. An arrest just for possession could get you barred from entering the United States for basically ever. And even if you can get waivers to that, the longest your waiver can be is for 5 years at a time. So for reference, I have a client right now, professional soccer player, been on the national team. In 2006, so I was in high school when she was arrested. She was arrested at a bar because she had had a little bit too much to drink and she accidentally took someone else's purse. So she was arrested for petty theft. She now, in her 40s as a foreign national, still has to get waivers every 5 years so she can enter the United States, be it for her sport of choice, for visiting family members and friends, right? This is something that follows her forever. So it does happen. These denials do happen, and they can be super challenging to overcome.
Wow, that is fascinating. So again, there is a process that is not guaranteed for these student athletes that they'll get through the end of it. Okay, so those are kind of the government rules, right, of them getting in. What about once they get to school? What are some of the NCAA rules? We'll get to the NIL side of things in a second, but in terms of NCAA rules, are there any things that different in terms of how the NCAA deals with foreign student athletes versus student athletes from the U.S.?
So there aren't too many differences on how the players are treated once they're here. I think they fall under the same kind of restrictions when you do transfers, right? If they were, say, attending school in Spain, attending university in Spain and transfer to the United States, that like percentage to graduate really comes into play. And I had a student years ago that did not properly disclose where they were in their collegiate career abroad. And when they transferred as a freshman, but they were actually a sophomore, right? And when the NCAA found out, what did we have? We had an issue with their eligibility. So having all that information at the front, especially if the transfer is happening during their collegiate career to the United States, is incredibly important. Specifically for students that maybe English isn't their first language, they're not quite sure of the process, right? He wasn't like lying to the government. He didn't know, right? He wasn't lying to the NCAA, the school. He frankly did not know. But that's super important information that can impact both the school and the student.
I can only imagine how confusing that process is for somebody who doesn't speak English, moving to a new country. That's not easy.
Yeah. And a 19-year-old, right? I mean, these aren't, these are young kids.
That is a challenge. That is a challenge. So we talk about the rules from the government side of things, the NCAA side of things. Let's dive into the NIL discussion. Everyone is talking about NIL and student athletes finally having the opportunity to make money. I remember like being in high school, this was the paper that I would always write. College athletes deserve to make money. Now they finally have the chance to. But what is the state of play for foreign student athletes when it comes to NIL?
So it's pretty complicated. I mean, NIL, the NCAA started permitting it back in 2021. And since then, you've had 35 states pass laws of differing restrictions, what they permit, what's, school restrictions versus player restrictions. And it's all come down to a lack of guidance from the Department of Homeland Security. So federally, under the Department of Homeland Security, right, that's going to be USCIS. That's going to be those government agencies in the United States that tell you what an individual here can and cannot do, specifically when it comes to work, right? So F1 student athletes do not have work authorization incident to status, meaning that just by virtue of being here doesn't mean they can work. They can study, right? They can go to school, they can vacation, but they cannot work for money. They can, however, in certain situations, apply for work authorization. However, none of the NIL work really directly falls under that permissible work because the sort of work authorization students get are ones directly related to their degrees. So if you have a marketing degree, you're working at a marketing firm or for a sports team in a marketing way, right? But it doesn't cover those kind of NIL deals, those maybe third-party deals that students are getting into. So that's your biggest issue is with this lack of guidance, you have schools that don't allow any foreign student to participate in NIL, or if they do, it's at the student's own risk, schools that permit it to a certain extent, and schools that, or players that might take a little more freedom than I would counsel them to do, right, at risk of that individual status. Because if you are found to have worked without authorization, you are removable from the United States, right? And it is super hard to get back in after you've been found to work without authorization.
So it sounds like there is a little bit of a gray area, or at least people are kind of willing to push the envelope with it.
Yeah. So I think it got to the point where lawyers and especially, honestly, law professors were doing all of this background research on what is considered employment in the United States. Because the way immigration defines employment is like a this for that, like a quid pro quo, which interestingly is how the NCAA used to kind of define it as well, right? So you couldn't do like the pay for play. However, for student athletes, you can really only do payment for non-work activities or like a passive income, which really falls under this right of publicity. And I know this has been talked about almost ad nauseum, but the ability to sell your likeness for money instead of, say, going to a car dealership right? And spending the day there shaking hands so they can sell cars, right? That might be over the line. But selling your likeness and having billboards of you, right? I know there's like a gymnast in Philly, I think, that sells like a sports drink, where you're driving it on 676. That kind of stuff falls under that right to publicity, which is like a held right, that an individual has to their own likeness. So that's kind of where we've pushed the envelope. Would I recommend a student do certain team activities that are like team-wide NILs? I would be a little nervous depending on what that entails. Could they be there as a guest versus as somebody there for NIL purposes, right? Those are really case-by-case bases, and you have to not only factor in what you're willing to risk, but how you think the government's going to come out in this situation. And that right now is incredibly unclear.
Right. I think a lot of this is all unclear. That's, I've been speaking with people from across the sports industry, and I think unclear is like the operative word right now.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm one of the PAC-Hub's AI specialists. Today, I want to show you why PAC-Hub is the ultimate platform for college baseball players looking to transfer to a new college program. First, let's take a look at our extensive network of coaches. With over 150 coaches actively using our system, you have a huge pool of experts to connect with. Imagine having access to all these experienced coaches searching for talent like yours. You even have the ability to connect with any of these coaches via our internal messaging system. This means more opportunities to showcase your skills and find the perfect new team. Now let's switch gears and see things from a coach's perspective. Coaches can easily search for athletes by position or stat. Let's say I'm looking for a left-handed pitcher with good pitching stats. With just a few clicks, I can find top-performing pitchers who meet my criteria. This efficient search functionality ensures that coaches find the perfect fit for their teams and athletes get matched with opportunities that suit their strengths. PAC-Hub is all about connecting talent with opportunity. Whether you're an athlete looking to transfer to a new college team or a coach searching for the next star player, PAC-Hub has the tools you need to succeed. Don't miss out on the chance to be part of this amazing community. Join PAC-Hub today and take the next step in your baseball journey. Visit www.pac-hub.com to sign up now.
What about a situation where, let's say somebody is from France? Can they go and get some sort of quote unquote NIL deal in France? Or can the school work somehow through a company in France to get them money? Is that allowed?
So we've actually come upon this issue with students before. So if you are outside the United States and you're performing labor outside the United States for money, it does not implicate directly or indirectly U.S. immigration law. However, what you need to be really careful of is the nexus to the United States. So there's this, and I'm going to get really nitty gritty, and I'm sorry, my boss refers to me as a tactician. But there's this case called Matter of HERA that's quoted in the Foreign Affairs Manual, the FAM, which kind of governs the Department of State as it comes to visas and what's considered a violation. And in Matter of HERA, what they talk about is whether something is considered employment in the United States has a lot to do with the nexus to the United States. So did you perform the work here? Were you paid from a U.S. source? Were you paid here? Right? And Matter of HERA was all about this tailor who came in to take measurements on someone and then went back to his home country to actually make the clothes. And in that case, they said there wasn't a close nexus to the United States. So if a player is doing an NIL deal that is outside the United States for a foreign company and the work is performed outside the United States, that to us creates enough of a separation, although it is case by case, from the student rate and that kind of deal. So it's not unauthorized employment. But let's say they make the deal with a foreign company, but they're paid to the US bank account and they're posting on Instagram in the United States. That could be determined to be unauthorized employment. And you see that a lot in the influencer space as well, right? Where foreign influencers come to the United States, they make their videos here, they edit them here and post them here, they get paid here. That's employment. And you could be found to have committed unauthorized employment if you do that.
Wow. Okay. So again, kind of some gray areas.
Yeah, a lot of gray areas. It's all case by case. I know it's a very lawyer answer, but we tell like all of our teams, all of the schools, all the players, like if you're not sure, please send us an email because we would rather overthink it and have it be a simple answer than for you to come to us after the government's told you that you worked without authorization.
Easier to, get ahead of the issue than try to figure it out from the back end. What are some potential workarounds to this for a student athlete who's from overseas? If they do want to make money, is their best bet just to do what we just talked about and kind of take those opportunities from their home country?
Yeah, so generally speaking, opportunities in your home country, right to publicity are your easiest way if you're here in an F1. There is what's called like the O1. So the O1 is your extraordinary ability. People call it the Einstein visa. I think that's kind of a misnomer. What it means is that you're one of the best in your field, your niche field, right? So let's say you are a Heisman nominee from France, right?
Which would be really cool, by the way.
Which would be really cool and very rare because football
Yes.
players are not often. Although I did do a visa for a French player in the NFL.
That's awesome.
But let's say that you are, which would be in and of itself a historic event. Right. That likely could get you what's called an O1 extraordinary ability. And with that, you can attend school and you can work and you can word the O1 in a way, right? Where you have these different NIL deals, right? You'd have to kind of include an itinerary of being like, here are the NIL deals I do. Here's the playing that I do for the school. Their remuneration is actually just in like a full ride scholarship or room and board, right? O1s don't have like an amount they per se need to be paid. And that would be a way to kind of expand what you can do. However, very few college athletes, quite frankly, would qualify for an O1, especially if you're D2, D3. I mean, if you're doing NIL at that level, that's great, but you're not going to get an O1. However, there are certain D1 athletes, especially those who are like the top of the draft in MLS, right? Those players probably could have received an O1 while they were collegiate athletes.
Okay, so it's not just being a really good athlete. You have to be
the
best of the best. Okay, that makes sense.
But you can tailor it, like, so you don't necessarily have to say like you're the best Division I football player. You can say you're the best Division I rookie football player or or safety or whatever. Like you can really tailor it. You don't have to necessarily say like you're the cream of the crop, right? We've gotten EB1 extraordinary abilities, which is like the O1 for immigrants for 18-year-old soccer players. We've done it for veterans. We've done it for rookies. And we've done it for everyone in between. So it's really finding that niche area that you fit and making the argument.
One of the topics that we have spoken about a decent amount on this podcast, the house settlement, which is a revolutionary thing that will change college athletics if it is finalized. What kind of impact may that have on foreign student athletes?
So kind of like the back payment that the NCAA is working out with the colleges, I'm less concerned with, because you could argue it's like, it's not quite remuneration for services, right? They could phrase it in a way where it doesn't come off as employment. And a lot of those people, especially if you're going back to 2016, like they're probably not F1s anymore, right? They're either have green cards or they've gone home, very likely in the last like 9 years. My bigger concern is actually the revenue sharing, the permitting colleges to allow revenue sharing, because doesn't that bring into question whether these student athletes are actually employees, which of course brings up like the union argument, right, in Dartmouth, where like the football players unionized. But I think that is the bigger issue. If student athletes are employees, which a revenue sharing agreement kind of makes it feel like they are, right? If you're sharing earnings with them based on their NIL and you're controlling their day-to-day, which is kind of what the definition of employment is, are they not employees? And if they're employees, well, F1s without, right, their optional practical training, which is related to their studies, can only perform on-campus employment. But that's limited to like, you're working at the library. You're not, playing D1 soccer. So unless they expand that definition or somehow explicitly permit an exemption for like NCAA athletes, I think that raises a lot more issues for the students. Like, do they have to then not obtain the revenue sharing? Do they have to hold off on it? Does it have to be provided to them in the form of a scholarship, put in a trust potentially for use at a later date? How do you make it work in a way where it doesn't come off like they're getting paid for their services, which in a sense this revenue sharing kind of is?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, it seems like they'd be employees. Are there visas that already exist that could apply in this situation? Or would they have to, like you said, kind of push the boundary, make it some sort of exception or create something new?
So your O1 is probably your best bet. There's a couple of visas like your H1B, that's your specialty occupation, but we kind of refer to that as a unicorn because you have to enter the cap. There's like 65,000 slots and 400,000 applicants. You also need a bachelor's degree to even like enter. And most of these student athletes are 19 years old, so they do not have a bachelor's degree. Your TN, which is for your Canadian Mexicans, it's essentially like an H1B, but kind of it's like a broader category, but you still usually need a degree to enter it. So there aren't that many options, right? You have your P1, your internationally recognized athlete. That could work for some of the student athletes, maybe if they played for their U17 national team or have international appearances, right? But you really need to show that you've been recognized internationally for your skill, which most student athletes are not going to have at this point. So there's pretty limited options for them in which they could take advantage without additional guidance or new regulatory provisions of these revenue sharings.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm one of the PAC-Hub's AI specialists. Today, I want to show you why PAC-Hub is the ultimate platform for college baseball players looking to transfer to a new college program. First, let's take a look at our extensive network of coaches. With over 150 coaches actively using our system, you have a huge pool of experts to connect with. Imagine having access to all these experienced coaches searching for talent like yours. You even have the ability to connect with any of these coaches via our internal messaging system. This means more opportunities to showcase your skills and find the perfect new team. Now let's switch gears and see things from a coach's perspective. Coaches can easily search for athletes by position or stat. Let's say I'm looking for a left-handed pitcher with good pitching stats. With just a few clicks, I can find top-performing pitchers who meet my criteria. This efficient search functionality ensures that coaches find the perfect fit for their teams and athletes get matched with opportunities that suit their strengths. PAC-Hub is all about connecting talent with opportunity. Whether you're an athlete looking to transfer to a new college team or a coach searching for the next star player, PAC-Hub has the tools you need to succeed. Don't miss out on the chance to be part of this amazing community. Join PAC-Hub today and take the next step in your baseball journey. Visit www.pac-hub.com to sign up now.
Just to follow up on the house side of things, do you know if foreign student athletes have been included in any of these, anything that's going on around house? I know I saw like Livy Dunn filed something about house. Like, has there been anything with foreign student athletes trying to get involved in that regard?
So I haven't seen any of them like trying to be added right to the actual lawsuit itself, but they're going to be implicated regardless. So especially moving forward, right? Even if they're not in the initial settlement, if there's going to be revenue sharing moving forward, if there's going to be this, 10 years of the NCAA paying basically back wages, right? To former players and current players, there's going to be thousands upon thousands of student athletes that are going to be potentially implicated and have their non-immigrant status implicated by this settlement. And I'm not sure that's really been discussed in the NCAA, and I haven't seen that many articles really discussing how this could affect all those players, right? I mean, I agree that athletes should be compensated for their services, even at the so-called amateur level, especially if they're making their schools hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But I also want to make sure that F1s don't violate their status and don't get, deported or removed from the United States.
Right. And to anyone who doesn't think that foreign student athletes don't have an impact on college athletics, like I, again, just called 22 games in the last 11 days. A decent chunk of those athletes on those teams were from outside of the United States, and they're some of the best players out there. So this is a major, major issue. A lot of the rules involved in this discussion that we're having today have come from the U.S. government side of things, and we have just had a change in administration with drastically different visions on immigration from the last administration to the current one. What impact could that have on all of this?
I'm interested to see, because on the one hand, you've seen the administration kind of put forward a potential green card option for anyone that graduates college in the United States, which is a streamlined process that I think most immigration attorneys are perfectly fine with if it happens. But on the other hand, you've seen the increase in detention efforts, deportation, removal, right, of foreign nationals for various reasons, some of which were never charged with criminal offenses. I think, in the last Trump administration, there was, of course, the travel ban that was highly contested. So basically, under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the president has pretty broad authority to stop people from entering if he sees that they're a threat to national security. So what this means is you can basically do, unless you're violating the Constitution, which he sort of did, broad-based restrictions on who can enter the United States, even if they have visas, right? So they could go to the Department of State, go to the consulate, get a visa, and be denied entry to the United States. And there is a new travel ban coming, right? We're kind of just waiting for it. In January 20th, that's when they had that executive order discussing a proposed travel ban, right? They were going to look at the security and the scrutiny, and they were going to look at the embassies, and then Rubio was whoever DHS, right, is going to look into kind of the threats and concerns. And I think a lot of countries are going to be added to that, right? So far, it seems like your normal ones, Pakistan, Libya, Syria, but Venezuela is going to be on the list too, which I think implicates a lot of Venezuelan nationals living in the United States. And part and parcel to that is their current cancellation of TPS, right, or temporary protected status, which I wasn't planning on talking about, but now that I'm on my soapbox, I will go into my TPS diatribe. So a lot of people in the United States, and they might be student athletes as well, are here pursuant to temporary protected status, which is like a form of humanitarian parole. So people from Venezuela, Nepal, Afghani nationals were admitted pursuant to this. A lot of Ukrainians under the Uniting for Ukraine program, that's how they entered. It was humanitarian parole. All of those programs are being paused, stopped, and a lot of them are being canceled. So you're also potentially going to have students from mixed families where some of them have status and some don't. Or maybe they have F1s, but their parents have TPS, where the parents lose status. And that could separate the families and cause the students to have to leave the United States as well.
Interesting. So a lot of potential changes, still things to come potentially from the Trump administration as well. Certainly we'll be monitoring all of that. As we wind down here, Ashley, one last question for you. I want to give you all the power in the world to fix the issues that are facing college athletics. We can keep it narrow if you want, focusing on F1 visas and how that impacts student athletes, or I'll give you the floor and you could fix the whole thing if you want. But what changes would you make to alleviate some of the issues that we're dealing with in college athletics?
Oh, so much. So I would streamline the visa process specifically, right? Because right now you have to go to the embassy, right? You have an appointment. It's a long and arduous process, and it's nerve-wracking, right? You're 19 years old, you're in front of this officer and they're like interrogating you, right? Then you're at the port of entry and you're feeling interrogated. So streamline the process, expand interview waivers, right? So you just have to mail in your I-20 and your passport and you get back your visa stamp and go from there. Expand work authorization for F1s. Quite frankly, in a capitalist society that we so claim to be, should not everyone have the right to work if they wish to? And shouldn't students be the same? So expand work authorization. And, even if it's all student or all F1s, right, can work, a certain amount of hours per week for remuneration. Is that really such a bad thing when the US job market right now? I mean, it's doing fine, but there are a lot of open jobs in like the lower sectors, right, that are less well paid that students tend to fill. And if you have a lot of foreign students that can't work, those are people that could fill those jobs. Oh boy, I have so many. I mean, I don't like travel restrictions at all, personally. So I would definitely not have any blanket travel restrictions. I think individuals or certain groups can be, prohibited from entering the United States. Terrorist organizations, groups links to terrorist organizations, anything of that nature. People who've committed really serious criminal offenses, crimes involving moral turpitude, aggravated felonies. But I think small drug offenses and DUIs shouldn't necessarily make a person inadmissible to the United States, considering a lot of people in the United States partake in drugs and alcohol. It seems a little, it seems a little ridiculous that an individual 30 years on, because they, caught smoking marijuana in their 20s, is having trouble coming to the United States. Like that does come off really disingenuous. So I think those are my main ones. I mean, I'm pretty pro-immigrant, so I could go on and on. But for students specifically, those are my biggest ones.
Okay, awesome. Well, Ashley, I really appreciate all of your time and insight today. Thank you so much, and hope to stay in touch.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, there you have it. Our fantastic guest today, Ashley Rotchford, joining us on the Around the Huddle podcast. Really insightful discussion. If you're a foreign student athlete, definitely save this video, and we'll certainly monitor what's to come with changes in the Trump administration, their policies, and the House settlement around the corner as well, how that impacts foreign student athletes. A reminder that we are powered by PAC-Hub. Take a look bottom of your screen, PAC-Hub.com. If you're a student athlete, if you are a coach, that's the place to meet. PAC-Hub, connecting athletes with opportunities, really a revolutionary product in this ever-changing landscape of college athletics. I know the winter season's coming to an end. The spring sports season is starting up. If you are going to enter the NCAA portal, give PAC-Hub a look as well. That'll do it for today's episode. Big thanks to all of you for joining us, and we will talk to you soon on our next show of the Around the Huddle podcast.